Hello and welcome to these video tutorials where today we're going to be concentrating on creating some very basic walk cycles using Toon Animate. We'll be working with cutout style animation, so this character on the screen here is all rigged up and ready to go. So as long as you have a basic understanding of rigging and hierarchies, you'll be able to follow along pretty easily. So for example, if we grab the arm at the shoulder, this will move the whole arm. If we select the forearm, it'll bend at the elbow. Select the hand, it'll move at the wrist. And we have the same setup at the leg also. So what we need to do when animating is at all times make sure we have the animate button enabled, and we'll be moving the various limbs using this transform tool here. Okay, on here we have the character on one layer, which is contained in a peg, so everything's contained in there, and the layer beneath, we've just got this line here, which is just a guideline for a bit of ground, just so we've got a bit of reference there. So first thing I'm going to do is this ground layer, I'm just going to come out to around frame 80, just hit F5 just to expose that for more than we need. And what we're going to do first is concentrate on the side view walk cycle. So if you're new to walk cycles, this is a good place to start. We're going to just cover the basic walk cycle, and what you'll be able to do is just learn some basic techniques. Then after a while you'll be able to add in your own little tweaks and quirks and maybe shortcuts along the way. So what we're going to do first is concentrate on something called key poses. Now, what a key pose is, this is the pose of a character in its most extreme position during a cycle or a piece of animation. So for example, in the side view walk cycle, the key poses would be something like the character in full stride with the legs full apart and so on. So we need to create these first. So just a bit of animation theory here, just things that are used in the industry. What you'd have in animation, you'd have an artist create the key poses, then these key poses would be handed to another set of artists called in-betweeners, and they were figured out what would happen in between the first key pose and the second key pose, and they would in between all the animation between. So what we're going to do is work that way. We're going to put the character into the key poses, then have Toon Animate work out the in-betweening for us. Then we're going to go in further and just tweak little things and you know, just tidy things up from there. So what we'll do first is create our first key pose. So make sure you have these two buttons here, the animate and the transform, enabled. What we're going to do is, first key pose, we're going to have the character in full stride. So we'll just drive this leg forward. So this leg would be round about here. Then this leg in the background, we're just going to move, bend at the knee slightly. And what we've got here, the legs and the arms would work in opposite directions. So the right leg is going forward, so the right arm would move back, and the left leg's going back, so the left arm would move forward. So I'm just going to open the torso, turn it off for a second so I can select this arm, move that forward. Okay, so that's pretty much the first key pose in position, but you'll notice that the character's now floating above the ground. So what we need to do is just move this character down so his heel's hitting the floor here. So what's happened here is, when the character's in full stride position, you lose a bit of height because the legs are spread apart, so you just naturally lose a bit of height there. So what we're going to do is just move this down to around about there, and you'll see here also this back foot, he's kind of balancing on his toes. What I've done with the feet is I've created drawing substitution. So I've just gone into the symbol. If you double click, you'll just see, making sure you've got the library open, I've got 3 cells here, all containing variations of this foot. So I've got this one, slightly bent and slightly more bent. So let's come out on top, and I've done that for both feet here, so we can swap these out. So this foot, this is going to be more sort of bent at the toe, so I'm just going to swap it out for this foot. and you'll notice that it's now floating above the ground, but that's okay because remember this leg is slightly further away, so it's going to appear higher than this line here, so that's absolutely fine. So I'm just going to move this down a bit. So this is our first key pose blocked in. What we need to do is create the next one. Now in a walk cycle, a side view walk cycle, what you'd have is this pose, then you'd have a pose where the legs are passing, then the next key pose would be the same as this but in the opposite direction, so these legs would be switching, and the same with the arms. Then the next key pose would be the next passing position, and then it would go back to this one to complete the cycle. So what we're going to do is, this is the way I like to work. I'm going to create the next key pose the same as these but swap things out. So all I'm going to do here is I'm just going to come out to around cell 3. I'm just going to hit F5 to expose it a bit more. I'm going to come to the second cell, just going to hit F6 to keyframe that, F6 on the next keyframe. So now what I have is 3 key poses all exactly the same. Now the first and third can stay the same. This second one we're just going to swap everything out, so we're just going to reverse the position of this leg. We know we need to swap this for a bent foot there. This leg will come forward, and remember this is a bit further away, so this foot, we need to position this leg so it's just a little bit above. It doesn't need to be a lot, it's only very slight. And these arms need to swap through, so we'll bring this back, bring this forward. Okay, so what we have now, we have this key pose, this key pose, and now we've got a copy of the first. So what we need to do now is create the next key pose, which is going to be a position where these legs are about to cross. So all I'm going to do here is these 2 keyframes at the end here, the last 2, I'm just going to select these. I'm just going to move across one cell, and you'll see here this second one is created a kind of in between for us where the character's kind of just standing upright, which is absolutely fine. Now what we're going to do is grab the last key pose on its own and do exactly the same. So we're just going to pull that over, and now we have the same again. So these dashed lines here, these are in betweens, and we're going to make key poses out of this. So I'm just going to hit F6 there, and the same on this one. So now we have all these keyframes. So we'll come back to the second one, and you'll see here the character's now below ground level. So what I need to do is select it and nudge it up so that this foot is kind of on the ground here. And we'll do the same now with this key pose. Just going to notch this up, just like so. Come back to this second key pose, and we'll start to put this into its position. So what we need to do here is create a position where these legs are crossing so they can swap out. So this first keyframe, this leg is full forward, so what we need to do now is start to move this back and start to move the left leg forward, and the arms will be doing the same. So in this key pose we've already moved everything up, so this leg is now coming back. So it was in this position, but it's going to start to come back now. So what we're going to do is pretty much where it was, but we're just going to add a slight bend, so we've got the weight just above the heel there, just so we've got a slight bend. So we see we need to bring the character down just a bit more where I've done that, just a tiny amount. And this leg here, this needs to be, this was in this position, but it's going to come forward. So what it's going to do is going to come to about here, and it's going to ready itself to come forward. So what it will need to do is bend at the knee here. So this could be somewhere around here. This foot I'm going to swap out to the straight one. And these arms, I'll leave them as they are because they're kind of in the position where they're swapping through. So this one was back here and it's at this midpoint now ready to go forward, and the same with this back one here, it's just come from the front and it's passing through. So what we have now is the first keyframe, key pose, then the second, then the third. Now we need to put this one into position, and you'll notice the height here. So this first key pose is a bit lower. If you look at the head, when we move to the second key pose, we've gained a bit of height. Next key pose, we've lost height because we've hunkered down and we've brought the height down because the legs are apart. Then this next one, it's going up again, then it'll come down. So this creates a kind of bounce within the character. Without that, if the body stayed at the same height all the way through, it would just appear to glide. So we need to have like a level of bounce there. So moving on to this key pose, what we need to do is create this key pose, but we're just going to swap the legs out. So the right one will be fully bent now. So coming in, what we're going to do first is just do exactly that. Grab this right one, swap this foot out, and this leg here, I'm just going to have this slightly bent so the weight's kind of over the heel. Remember, you need to keep the weight, because all this here is heavy weight, it's going to be balanced over the heel of the foot to hold it in the best position. So that's it, that's the key poses all plotted out. So this is your first, your second, your third, your fourth, and then you complete the cycle by going back to the first again, then it'll just repeat. So you'll notice here that we've got 4 key poses. This fifth one is just a copy of the first. So we have 4 key poses, but you can break it down further obviously, because this one is the same as this one but swapped out, and then the second one is the same as this one but swapped out. So you only really need to remember 2 key poses and just reverse the position of the legs. So what we're going to do now, at the moment this will just animate too fast. We need to create some frames in between this so we can slow the walk down. So all we need to do is I'm going to grab from the end of this keyframe here, I'm going to grab this up to the second, and I'm just going to position all these so the second one starts at around cell 10 there, and you'll see here we've got this line here. It's created some in-between animation for us now. So from the first to the second key pose, if you scrub through, you'll see it's figured this out for us now. So what we're going to do is now grab the last 3 keyframes, do the same. So the second one will stay where it is. So we're constantly leaving one behind as we move along. So let's move this along. And finally this one will bring to around 40. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to close this down to 40. So what we have now is, if we scrub through this slowly, we'll point out the keyframes. So we hit keyframe there, in between in, keyframe, in between in, keyframe, in between in, back to the original keyframe. So this is our basic cycle, but we still need to do a bit of work here. There's a bit of tidying up to do. The first thing we need to do is quite important, in that this is the full cycle now. So we know that when it gets to this point, we need it to cycle back to the start here and go through again. But you'll remember this first key pose, we copied and pasted it to the very end here. So in effect, if we cycle this animation now, you're going to get 2 frames the same back to back. So you're going to have a slight pause in your walk cycle, which we don't want. We need a constant motion. Very simple fix. All we need to do is this last key pose, which is the same as the first, just come to the cell before it, so you'll see there's just a slight change. So this cell before, just hit F6. That's all you need to do. And then that original one at the end there, select it, hit delete, and now close this timeline up to go up to the last keyframe. And what you'll have now, when this gets to this last keyframe, you've got this position. Then when it cycles back to the first, there we go. So we haven't got two frames that are exposed together, so we haven't got this pause in the walk cycle. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to come up here to the play controls. I'm going to hit this second one along, which is the this is just a repeat button. So if I press play, it'll just continually cycle. So let's watch this. There you go. So we've got a nice motion there. We've got no pause in. All the keyframes are nice and even. We've got a nice bounce there going up and down. So all we need to do here is just go in and start to tweak a few little things now. Okay, incidentally, this would be a good point to decide whether the speed your character's walking at is right. So what we can do here, if we just quickly play this again. So we've got a keyframe at every 10th cell here. So we've got a nice kind of relaxed walk here. So what we could do, I mean, to speed this up, we could just close these in. So I could grab these last keyframes here, bring them in, say three cells, then grab these ones, bring them in, another three there, and there. Then I would need to close this timeline up to match. Now if we play it, we've got a faster walk. So this is a good point to figure out the speed you want, because when you start to go in and just change, you know, some of the things we need to do here, it's a good idea to decide on the speed of the walk first. So I'm just going to bring these back to where I had them, because I quite like the kind of speed this was going at. So again, let's delete that. Let's bring this back. This just closes up all the frames here. Lost a foot there. Okay, where I've changed some frames there, I've managed to swap something out to nothing there. Okay, that's better. Okay, so I've brought this back to the speed I want. So let's watch that again quickly. Yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy with that speed. It's quite a relaxed stride he's got there, and it matches the bounce. So obviously, depending on your character, I mean, you could give it a smaller bit of bounce there, or a bit more. Okay, let's pause that. So I'm just going to go in now and just keep an eye on things. So I'm going to come to the first cell here, between the first two keyframes, so this one and this one. I'm just going to scrub through and just look at the feet. So here, this right foot would start to bend at the toes. So the first to the second keyframe all seems to be pretty much okay. Just at this second keyframe, we kind of gain a bit of height off the ground. So I'm just literally going to move this down a sec. So this is just all the tweaking we need to do now. Just come in and tweak things. So between the second keyframe and the third, as we were saying, we need to create some toes bending on both feet here, because this right one's going to start to bend, and this left one at this point would start to bend round about here. So I'm just going to grab that and swap it out. Slightly move this, and this one here, let's try about there. We can always come back in. Okay, let's try about, I'm going to go for about here, and I might come back and create one a bit earlier. So let's so it starts to roll maybe a bit earlier, about there, and as it comes up to about there, it's going to swap out to a straight foot. Let's go back to the start. So this here as well, in this first few frames here, where this foot's leaving the ground, we're going to swap this out to the straight one. So about here I'd make that straight. Here this would swap out to a slightly bent one. So I'm just moving things so I'm keeping that height. I mean, remember, this is moving at a brisk pace, so you know, all these little tweaks we're making there, they're very slight. So here, this key pose, I think I need to bring the character down just a bit. It's a bit too high. It's maybe about there. That works. Okay, let's go back to the start. Okay. You see this left leg, it's going below that line there. I'm just going to cheat a little bit here, and all I'm going to do is just grab the entire left leg and just nudge it entirely up at a couple of points. Again, it's nothing that I'll notice in the final animation, but it's just these tiny little tweaks that are just, they're almost like little cheats really. So it just enables that that foot is not going beneath that line, so we can get away with that. So we can see here that it's bending, it's going straight, it's coming back, it needs to bend around here. It comes back to here. Okay, so let's concentrate on the right leg now. So I'm not too fussed about it going beneath the line here, although this second keyframe is still a bit high, so I'm just going to come down a bit. Change that a frame early. Here we need to swap, so we missed one there. Swap that back to straight there. Okay, let's deselect everything and just play through this and cycle it a few times. There we go, that's looking pretty good. And you'll notice all the little tweaks we made, they're not very noticeable in the actual animation because everything's moving quite swiftly. We've got a nice bounce there. The toes are bending. And you can see it kind of cheats the eye because it looks like it is actually moving. When you get to this point here, you watch this foot and it looks to be actually bending, but in actual fact it's only snapping this frame to that frame. This point here, it's literally snapping from one drawing substitution to the next, but when we watch this cycling it actually appears to be moving because a human eye can't actually figure that out, it's just seeing the motion there. Okay, so that's the basic walk figured out as far as the legs go. So what we can do now is just start to add in some other little whistles and bells. You can see here that the head, although the body's moving up and down, the head's fixed, it's kind of keeping straight up. So all I'm going to do is come in the middle of each keyframe, and with the transform tool here, all I'm going to do is just slightly move it up, then between the next two keyframes slightly down, between the next two slightly up, between the next two slightly down. So when we scrub through, see we've just got this kind of nodding and bobbing going on to create a bit more momentum. So let's hit play. So there you see we've just got a nice little bob there with the head. You could even do a bit of wobble with the neck as well if you wanted. Another thing you can do is kind of, you know, you could swing the arms a bit more, so when it gets to this point, maybe here you could move this up so it kind of snaps back like that. And we can do the same with the left arm, so when it's coming forward to about here, we could kind of snap this to here. Let's play this through now. So I mean that's quite exaggerated, but this is just to show the little tweaks you can make. So it gets to there. You could even add some movement to the wrists there. And something I have done that you can also do is swap these hands out. So these hands, I've created another set there which are just kind of outstretched. So if we watch this, he's got quite big hands, really cartoony, but you know, I mean, he could almost, with these pairs of hands, I mean, you can imagine when he gets to about here, he could actually be doing something like bouncing a basketball as he walks along. So you could see here we could add like a kind of motion there. So as this hand comes up, actually this right one would be a better example because it's closer to us. So as this hand comes up, maybe here it comes up, so let's play this. There you go. So as this comes up, he's kind of walking along with his basketball, just bouncing it along as he walks along. Okay, let's come back here. So I'm just going to swap these hands back. Let's watch this again. So you can see there, I've got this animation still here. So that's pretty much the basic side view walk cycle. So you can see, concentrating on the key poses first, we need to establish what the character's doing, and then once the program's done the in-betweening for us, we just go in and start to fine-tune things, and we can swap symbols out, we can move things about and create the walk cycle. And again, remember, you know, you can bob the head, move the hands, swap the hands out too. And at the moment, as this walk cycle stands, it's stationary. So what you'd have here, he's walking, but he's fixed to the centre of the stage. So what you would want to do here is the background you would move across. So say this character's walking through the park, you could have like a very long park background and have it moving across here while this character's walking, and as he's on the stage he would appear to be walking through the park. But also what you can do is have the character walk from the left of the stage to the right. If you want, you could attach it to a peg. This means you could have a, if you wanted, you could have a stationary background, and you could just have the character walk quickly from left to right of the screen, turn around, start talking to another character, that kind of thing. So all you would need to do there is, this character's contained in a peg, but what you can do is just hit this plus button, hit peg, grab the character peg, drop it onto it. So now it's contained in this peg here. What you can do is just grab it on the first frame to where you want it to be. So say you've got it here, and then the last one you can have it about here. And now what will happen when you hit play, he'll move across, but obviously you've got to figure out, you know, how far you want him to move, like so. Let's take off the replay button there. So he could stop there, then you could position him into his static standing pose, maybe turn around and so on. So that's just connected to another peg there. Okay, so that covers the basic side view walk cycle. So hopefully that's kind of took a little bit of confusion out of key poses, trying to position your character, because that's always the trickiest part. Just, you know, where do you move the body parts to create this walk cycle. So work on that, figure out your key poses. It's a good idea to maybe draw in a sketchbook, just practice drawing the key poses while you're away from Animate, just so you can get them into your mind. So as long as you've got the key poses down and you've got the in-betweening in there, you can just go in and start to tweak things. As I say, you'll find your own little tweaks and quirks you can incorporate into your own style. I mean, these 4 key poses, for instance, you could add more. I mean, between this and this, you could have a further key pose here, where the character's hunkering down even further. Then between these 2 key poses, maybe he goes a bit higher, so you can add a bit more of a bounce to the character and so on. So you know, the 4 key poses here aren't the only option. You can come in and further just create your own, just to add a bit more variety to the walk, because remember, depending on the character, they might walk differently, so you need to bear that in mind also. So this is a nice straight ahead relaxed walk in the side view. So practice with the key poses, as I said, and follow the way I did things here, where I created the key poses on the first few cells of the timeline, then just exposed them for longer to create that in between. I just find creating those key poses all in one little chunk rather than spread across the timeline is just the way I do things. It's just easier for me to do it that way, but you might prefer to, you know, spread it out, create one key pose on cell 1, then do the second one on cell 10, etc. It's entirely up to you, but just showing you the way I do things. So keep practicing with this, and hopefully quick enough you'll be creating your own walk cycles very quickly. So have fun with that, and when you're ready, move on to the next lesson.